Well, hello there, and welcome back to Digital Foundry. And this is the 127th episode of DF Direct Weekly, which is still our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. We're doing this one in the wake of the early access launch for Starfield. So, yeah, it's a pretty big week. Joining me, first of all, John Linneman.
Hey, Rich. Yeah, I'm back in my box here after meeting up with you guys in person last week, which was wonderful. But here we are, separated again by the interwebs.
Yes, all in, put back in our boxes again. That includes Alex Battaglia.
Yes, I'm stuck in a box just like John here, but I'm excited to talk about Starfield, which I've kind of barely touched on a PC, so you're going to have to be waiting a little bit for my video here.
Oh, but Alex, we're all stuck in a box, and then I'm thinking we got Richard here, who could be nicknamed Dick.
Dick in a box. Dick in a... Yeah, Lonely Island.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had to make that reference. Anyway, Richard, after you're done being horrified, please continue.
Okay, let's crack on with the first news story. Okay, so it was Starfield week this week. Obviously, it's the biggest launch of the year. I'd say it does probably eclipse, in terms of hype at least, Baldur's Gate, Hogwarts Legacy, all of those biggies. Man, it's been a huge year for games generally. But Starfield is here. Alex has yet to really get deep into the game. But, John, you've spent a great deal of time with it. And obviously now you have the benefit of access to the combined thoughts of essentially the entire gaming press, apart from Eurogamer and a couple of other sites. So tell me, how do you think this game has landed, and does it sort of line up with your expectations?
Yeah, so I did kind of expect it to be a little bit divisive. For the record, I've covering it. I'm at about 30 hours on the game clock right now, so there's still a lot more to play. It kind of feels like I've only just scratched the surface, really. But I think going into it, my expectations versus what the game actually is, they varied a lot, and I think I can imagine many other reviewers had a similar feeling, and whether they came out the other side liking what it is versus taking issue with it, that's going to vary per site, right? But it is basically Space Rim. Like this, it's a Bethesda game. It should have been obvious from the get-go, but that's exactly what it is. It just uses space as its canvas, so to speak. So it really is. It is not Star Citizen. It's not No Man's Sky. Those games are actual like space exploration games. This is a Bethesda game with space as a backdrop. And that has a huge benefit, I think. And I think a lot of people picked up on this as well, is that it just means a lot more variety, right? You play Fallout 4, you play Skyrim. I mean, they built really nice worlds there, but that environment is that environment. Like when you're in Skyrim, it looks like that snowy, mountainous, coniferous area all the time. You've got some caves, you've got, various things, but it's the same. With Starfield, you basically have all these very unique, bespoke, if you will, areas. Like a place like Neon that exists. It's this beautiful cyberpunk-esque city built on these towering pylons on an ocean planet. It's a rather evocative thing. It's something that you've not really seen before, and that really kind of enraptured my imagination. I enjoyed it a lot. And the whole game is like this. But I think where it missed expectations, and I've since come to terms with, has to do with like the segmentation of everything. It's a modular game, and this is true of all the Creation Engine games, right? And I think this has some benefits, like say, they don't need to worry about scaling buildings to size, right? So, there's loading screens between basically all large structures and the outside world, and then there's loading screens from the planet to space. That's kind of the big thing, right? We knew there wasn't going to be seamless transitions from space to planet, but I was a little bit surprised by the number of loading screens you see when you're actually on the ground, going in and out of buildings and such. Not every building, but any of the larger locations are like this. And again, I think the benefit there is that then they can design these interiors as a modular thing that doesn't necessarily perfectly match the exterior geometry. So it allows for slightly more interesting level design, but it's also slightly less immersive. I mean, what do you guys make on the segmentation thing?
I think based upon the performance that we've seen so far covered in Oliver's video and the reports I'm seeing across the web, there are just zones that are much heavier than others.
Yeah,
and I
that's
think
true.
the segmentation is also a good way to mitigate performance issues on their end. They don't have to worry about simulating the radiant AI when you walk in a building that requires a loading screen from the people that were outside for that building, for
That's right.
example. I think that's actually, yes, it is less immersive, and I think it may clash with a little bit of the advertising, in terms of like the advertising wasn't showing like you walking into an area and loading screens occurring. That's not what advertising really does. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say, to be clear, it's not like they didn't. It's not like they lied about it. It's more
No,
like
they didn't.
they withheld information.
It was like an omission. It was like an omission, and I think a lot
Correct.
of people, you just run with your imagination, because they're saying like, these are the worlds and all these places where you go. So people just imagine these Star Citizen, No Man's Sky like exploration elements, but then it's segmented. But I think in the end that's actually probably a good thing for performance, as weird as it sounds. And that's the one thing that seems to be one of the more positive notes of all this, is the Xbox performance that was covered by Oliver specifically, and what you've been experiencing, John. It's a lot better than what you've seen of BGS games here, right, on console.
Yeah, I mean that's for sure. This is the first BGS game that's launched on a console that actually runs at a stable frame rate almost all the time. It's actually feels optimized and polished. I mean, yeah, it's 30 frames per second. We knew that, but it's steady. None of their prior releases were ever steady, especially at launch. I mean, we remember the Corvega factory in Fallout 4 that became like Tom's testing ground for that game. He revisited that place so often, and it was always like, I think early on it was into the teens.
Oh yeah,
It was pretty bad. Like, those games didn't run well. Starfield is consistent in comparison. But I think,
Well,
go ahead.
sorry, going back to the loading issue, the thing that stood out to me, which was a bit disconcerting when I first played it, was when you enter the spaceship and you climb up the ladder to go to the cockpit, and there's a loading bit there.
That's
And
confusing.
then you get to the cockpit and you're looking out at the open world that you've just exited,
So I
which is
I had a good think about this, Richard, and I think this might actually have more to do with your crew than with actually loading data, right? Because you're right, the world is still visible from within your ship, right? So you'd think, oh, why can't you just seamlessly transition? Well, you take crew with you on missions, right? And then there's also the crew that stays on board. So they would either have to
Have them already there.
ensure that they're always active within the ship, which may be more demanding, but then they also need to find a way to get the crew following you into the ship in a way that doesn't look horribly janky. It's like, if you got people following you and you're going into the ship, you climb up the ladder, then you have to watch them do bad ladder climbing animations, or they just like warp into the ship or something like that. It would basically not look very good, is my guess. And by putting a short loading screen there, it kind of solves that, because it's like, as soon as you're in the ship, everybody that should be in the ship is now in the ship with you as well. So it kind of feels like they're more sidestepping that potential issue than anything else.
Yeah, I think going back to the presentation we had at Gamescom, though, all of the loading was edited out. There was a lot of edits in there, obviously, but that was the thing that I did notice that we couldn't talk about at the time because we were under embargo, is that, basically there was no evidence whatsoever that it wasn't anything other than seamless.
Right.
I guess, editing is part of
Sure.
of it is about streamlining the whole thing into a presentation. But I do wonder whether people who saw that presentation then played the game would think, whoa, hold on a minute here.
Yeah, it especially hits home when you first arrive at New Atlantis and like everything is loading screens. Like, you're just like, you walk up to the tram, loading screen, you go to Constellation, loading screen. But the tram thing is interesting because it's actually just fast traveling from one location of the city to the other. It is actually a seamless city. If you decide to Skyrim your way up a building and like jump down to another area, like, it is fully seamless. It's just, if you want to go from point A to point B on the other side of the city, it does have to load. So at least it is still an open area. It only has loading when you use fast travel.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder whether some of those loading things could have been handled a bit more
Elegantly.
elegantly.
I think the solution here would have been canned animations or videos or something to sort of like make it seem like motion is happening, right? Like when the tram goes, like you show the tram leaving the station, and then you maybe have like an animation file, like a video play that shows the tram like going to the next location or something, rather than just dipping out.
This sounds like Mass Effect 1. Sounds like Mass Effect 1.
People complained about the elevators in Mass Effect 1, but their solution to it was worse, right?
Yeah.
For Mass Effect 2 and 3, they just threw in stupid loading screens everywhere. I actually preferred when they used the elevator in Mass Effect because it felt far more seamless.
And you got some nice, great crew interactions. You got to see a little bit more of the world. Yeah, I
think that would have been the better solution. And it's funny you bring up Mass Effect because that's what this game reminds me of a lot in terms of, it's like Mass Effect plus Skyrim.
I like
where
that.
Mass Effect was also segmented like this, right? But it didn't ultimately matter to the game experience because it's about the story and the quests you go on. And a lot of these quests can kind of come out of nowhere, right? And that's something else I really enjoy. Like, you're right, you land on a random moon or a random planet, the chances of finding anything interesting there is very low, but instead they spawn these like events where like, oh no, a ship suddenly you'll see a ship start to go down and crash on a moon, and then you run over to see what's going on, and then that can actually lead to a whole new quest line, which is cool, right? So it actually ends up feeling pretty natural. And that's kind of how I've come to grips with just the segmentation thing, is like, it would be neat to be able to travel between different planets or, do these seamless transitions maybe once, but over time, that's not actually fun, I would argue, right? Just walking across, like, I tried to find the limits of the planets, and you do eventually, when you land on a planet, you're like given this sort of like large radius area around you where you can go, but then eventually you hit an invisible wall and it says warp back to your ship, which feels pretty silly, I gotta say. I feel like they should have cheated a little bit more and just had you wrap around to the other side. But the fact is like, the time it takes to walk to that wall, there's nothing there. It's just empty terrain with nothing on it. Maybe they could have taken a page from Microsoft's Motocross Madness, actually. So when you hit the edge, it just like launches you like a cannon up into the air. That would have been all right.
Yeah, it would have been entirely in keeping with the with the scenario of the game. Yeah. I mean, who knows what happens in outer space?
Exactly.
Or there should be like all of a sudden you get a radio call. It's like, get back to the combat zone, soldier. Like from like all the Call of Duty games.
But yeah,
or walk in the other direction.
Talking about this game like this though is actually really difficult because I feel like I'm just rambling in all these different directions because there's like so much to say, and do you guys have any pressing questions, I suppose I should ask?
Well, my question, I mean, obviously, I think the toxic nature of the discourse on social media leading up to the launch is possibly up there with the console launches back in 2020, where it was basically a free-for-all for the most unhinged people in the video gaming community. But my question is this, John. Are any of the pre-launch controversies actually worth a damn?
No, not really. No, I hate that stuff. And it's the cycle that happens every time. I'll tell you what's going to happen. This game's going to come out. There's bad actors are going to, and it's not that difficult to find. They're going to find the areas where the game doesn't look great. They're going to parade this stuff around. They're going to point and laugh and have fun. And then the fans of the game are going to be very angry. But then in like a month, when Spider-Man 2 comes out, the fans that were very angry about Starfield will do exactly the same thing to Spider-Man 2. They're going to find the areas where it's weak. They're going to parade it around. They're going to point. And then the people that did that to Starfield will be angry about that. And then the cycle will continue. It happens every single time.
Yeah, I think my favourite trope at the moment of a total ridiculousness would be where you take a screenshot of a game from like 2014 or 2016 and then compare it with a particularly poor example of a game from 2023.
Oh my gosh.
And with the sort of intent of showing, hey, this game is actually worse than a last gen game, where basically the first 5 minutes of Starfield are enough to tell you that it's
a lot better looking.
A huge upgrade over Fallout 4 in just about every way.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's always the concept of the scale and scope of a game means that it can't have the same level of micro detail. Although, it does do some really interesting stuff close up, Starfield, I'd say. But yeah, I mean, the nature of the game is that it's not going to be, tailored to the extremes of like The Last of Us Part 2, which is essentially linear.
Yeah, not at all. No,
It's just kind of nuts, really. One thing
that's a good thing, though, right?
Yeah, I would say, though, there is an argument to be had for a reduced scope. I think the number of planets they've implemented here, it's impressive numbers-wise, but I suspect most people will not visit most of those planets, right? And I would have preferred... So I guess the one criticism I have with the way it's laid out is, like, let's say you land on a planet with a huge city, like New Atlantis, right? On Earth, for instance, when you land at a big city and you venture forth from that city, you will eventually find another city. But that's not the case here. It's like you've got one big, beautiful city surrounded by nothing. And that's basically how every planet is structured. So it's fine as far as gameplay goes, but it would have been interesting to have like a planet that at least had more to it than just like a central point of a city there, It feels a little bit strange. Like, it works for Neon because that's my favorite, because it is like a planet of water. And you can't even see the planet from when you're up. Once you've landed, you can't see. You just see like fog below you. But you can actually jump down there and you find it's all just ocean. And if you wander around the planet, there's nothing but ocean. And that's cool conceptually. I like that. But most planets aren't like that. You just see the planet around you.
I guess there is a plausibility issue of colonizing a planet and just having one city with no
that's what I mean.
Anything else on the planet whatsoever, like resource mining, suburban dwellings outside of the main city, that kind of thing is a bit odd. But then again, ultimately it's a game, and it's a Bethesda game, and
it's fine.
It's not trying to be No Man's Sky, which I think a lot of people probably didn't quite get.
Yeah, No Man's Sky doesn't have the story stuff, basically. Like, that's what this game is about. It's about those quests you go on and the stories and the situations you get into. I mean, there's even stuff that's very immersive sim-like at points where you're like, sneaking into like bases and, trying to find out information without weapons. Or there's one where you go to this planet where you have to participate in some kind of like something of a show. Basically, you have to survive it and get to the other side to hit a button and then get back. There's all these different mercenary battles that you end up in and tracing their leads. And there's like starship theft. You go to the factory where a starship was built early on, and you got to figure out like, all right, so how did this thing get stolen? Who stole it and why? And those types of quest lines are really interesting. And there's just nothing like that in a No Man's Sky. That's just a fully simulated world with that relies on the user to create stuff, kind of like a Minecraft, right? This is not that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you what, there is one pre-launch controversy which I think had legs, and that's the the fact that the PC version has launched with FSR2 and no other upscaling technologies.
Oh, okay.
I thought you were talking about something else, which you'll get to.
Like what? Go on.
Well, you'll get to it with the review situation.
Well, we'll get onto that one a bit later. But FSR2, no DLSS in the game, although as we speak, a modification has just been launched which does allow for DLSS and XeSS.
Two modifications.
Yeah,
it says a lot.
So we'll be taking a look at that, obviously, because obviously there was the whole AMD sponsorship situation soured the anticipation for the PC version of the game, because fundamentally you knew that if you had an Intel or an or an Nvidia card, you weren't going to get the best possible experience from the game. There was also the concept that prior AMD integrations hadn't worked out particularly well. I think we'll talk about the PC version in much more depth. I think there's issues with stuff like, anisotropic filtering isn't great. I think you've got issues with the lack of field of view. Yeah. It's not the perfect PC launch to begin with.
No.
But the AMD integration does seem to be limited to just FSR2 and variable rate shading by the looks of it.
And lack of sort of PC pushing features. You know,
Yeah.
it's very
Right,
much
of
just like
course.
the console version with a few extra meters to scale
Right.
up, right?
Yeah.
So there was an article in The Verge where Sean Hollingsworth spoke to AMD's gaming chief, Frank Azor, who we met at Gamescom. And he's basically not able to talk about the contract and the concept of whether DLSS was barred. But he says if they want to do DLSS, they have AMD's full support. He says there's nothing blocking Bethesda from adding it to the game. So hopefully there will be some kind of official integration. But it's still a bit murky. And I think that's a bit of a shame because some of the deals they've had, I mean, they've got some really interesting GPUs coming. Their CPUs are excellent. You're going to get a Starfield copy with all of those, which I think is where they should have been couching this whole integration from day one.
Absolutely.
As opposed to these weirdo specs they put out and the whole thing about blocking or maybe not blocking competing upscaling technologies. John, what do you think of the FSR2 implementation? I mean, I think it's all right.
I would say that compared to many other recent games, it's significantly better in terms of implementation. You still see the telltale FSR issues here and there, but the image quality I think is pretty good with FSR overall. So I can't really complain too much on that side. It's less about the image quality though, and more about the fact that no DLSS means no frame generation from DLSS, and the fact that even though FSR3 was just announced, that Starfield was not on the list of games to get the FSR3 frame generation either, because fundamentally this game is pretty heavy on the CPU, right? It's difficult to get high frame rates in Starfield right now. It's not the GPU that is the limiting factor in most builds, I would imagine, and frame generation would have been an absolutely perfect feature for this game. So this situation basically means you don't get that right now. And that's a bit of a bummer.
Something that was also slightly odd is when we had the presentation at FSR3 and they showed us the list of games that were, a list of companies rather, that were going to be working on FSR3. And you can kind of guess that, stuff like Cyberpunk is going to get FSR3 simply by virtue of the fact CD Projekt Red is on the list. But we didn't see Bethesda Game Studios.
That's what I mean,
there.
yeah. It wasn't there.
So it's not even being mooted as a possibility for Starfield. And I think you showed me a screenshot on the first day that you got the game where immediately after you touched the artifact and you're transported back to the kind of the sort of main base, you're in the 50s on a 12900K.
Yeah, and that initial base area.
You're seemingly not actually doing much there.
It's funny you mentioned that because that was also the point when I realized that I don't really need to use FSR2 at all on the PC. So when I speak of it, it's more the Xbox version uses it, and it looks a lot better than say Jedi Survivor or anything like that, right? But on PC, I'm just running native 4K because FSR doesn't really save you much performance when you're CPU limited, obviously. And I am CPU limited. Now, to be fair, most scenes do run a lot faster than that, but there's definitely areas where I'm dropping down into the 50s, which is a bummer. Obviously, that is entirely CPU related.
I think for me, this controversy, it's a whole thing. We've talked ourselves blue in the face about this in the past, but I feel like one thing is when you don't have DLSS or XeSS in. And one thing that is borne out by every single person testing FSR versus DLSS or XeSS is that the utility of FSR goes down as you have lower internal resolutions or even lower output resolutions. So with DLSS, you can get a pretty awesome 4K experience with performance mode. With FSR 2, that's usually a bridge too far. And so I look at it like, there's a huge portion of the audience that you can give a really great experience to, regardless of, like IHV stuff, just wars and whatever, but not having all the upscalers in a massive AAA game, like Rich said, probably the biggest game of the year, in terms of discourse and even money being thrown around as a result. It's like, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. There's no reason to not have all these great technologies in the game. So yeah, it's a shame. And I think it says a lot that people are just, two different mods can pop up doing the exact same thing through different methods of adding DLSS and XeSS into the game. So, wow. I mean, surely Bethesda could have done that. Maybe even better and quicker. So, yeah, that's how I feel about it right now. But we're going to talk about it when the PC review stuff is on its way.
Yeah, I mean, judging by the Xbox version, they have basically stuck to FSR 2 quality mode, which is the way to go, right? Yep. Because when you go beneath that upscaling factor, when you make it more aggressive, it starts to have issues, right? So the 1440p presentation on Xbox Series S seems to be upscaled from 900p. Looks good, I'd say. Oliver was quite happy with it. Yeah. Just looks like a slightly blurrier version of the Series X version. That's fine. Series X 4K upscaled from 1440p, FSR 2 quality mode again. And, that kind of works out. I think the best case scenario, actually, for FSR2 is 4K from a 1440p output. I also noticed on the PC version, something that I would actually like to see on all upscalers is that they don't have,
quality modes,
performance balanced quality. They actually just give you a percentage scaler. That's the way to go, right? With these upscalers, to dial in your own base resolution.
I'd say as an option, but not for everyone, because I think a lot of people just orientate themselves based upon simple things. And I see a lot of people already getting really confused in like the Reset Era PC performance thread about what those numbers mean for resolution scale. People don't know that 67% means around 1440p on a 4K panel, for example. So I agree with you as like a secondary option. You should always have that. That'd be super sick, especially for future scaling. But for simplicity, for simple users, not for simple people, but like people who just want to get in the game and do something easy, then I think actually reduced options can help people at times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess the other thing which intrigued me about the PC version is that the actual resolution scaling stops at 50%. So you can't actually use
ultra performance
the equivalent of ultra performance mode, which, as we saw in Immortals of Avium, didn't work out that great. And it's quite interesting to see how DLSS kind of works with ultra performance, where it stands up a bit better, but it's still obviously compromised. But I think the worst of the upscaling artifacts are kind of smoothed out to a specific degree where it's kind of okay, but it just doesn't work for FSR2.
There's one other interesting thing to mention about the PC version, and that's the HDR implementation. So first of all, the game does have HDR on Xbox. That's native, though it offers 0 options for adjusting it. I assume it relies on the system level HDR calibration screen, but on PC, for me at least, HDR triggers via auto HDR exclusively, and some users are reporting having issues getting auto HDR to work at all.
Yeah.
And I actually tested on Xbox by disabling auto HDR to see if it still triggers HDR, and it does. So it is a native implementation. I actually think the auto HDR version, though, looks better than the game's native HDR, which is interesting.
Wait, what?
No, it absolutely does. It's the highlights are much more intense. I think it definitely produces a more visually striking image than the native implementation.
Whoa, hold on a minute. The PC version is using auto HDR, right? And then the Xbox version isn't using auto HDR, but looks better with auto HDR.
No, I'm saying PC version with auto HDR.
Yeah, that's what he means.
Looks better than Xbox's native HDR implementation.
I was thinking maybe you could turn off the native HDR implementation on Xbox and use the auto HDR.
Do that.
You can't. Okay.
All of this would be solvable if they had like proper adjustments in the game to allow you to sort of tailor the experience. This actually also kind of happened with The Witcher 3 when it received its next-gen update. They added HDR to the game, but initially there were no adjustments for it, and it looked pretty bad, I would say. But they later patched those sliders in that allow you to tweak the different ranges, and that fixes it entirely. And I think Starfield needs that as well. And it probably should have a native PC implementation as well as an option.
Yeah.
Right, got it. Interesting. I'm now going to move on to this somewhat more controversial aspect of the whole process, the reviewing process, which is that, well, this was kind of weird, right? Because in the US, basically, I can't really think of any major outlet that did not receive Starfield review code and also had the ability to tell people that they had the game. Right. So, a couple of weeks back, actually, a lot of outlets received their codes and they could actually post about it and they could show the screenshot showing that the game was installing on their Xboxes or whatever. However, in Europe and more specifically the UK, very few review codes seem to have gone out. And basically Eurogamer and basically all of the ReadPop sites did not receive the game and had no indication of when they would receive the game. And we received the game, but from Bethesda US, right? So a couple of days ago, Eurogamer actually put out a statement saying, we're not going to be able to do a review for Starfield because we haven't had the game, right? And, just so you're aware. And then they mentioned that Digital Foundry would be getting the game or had the game, and there would be coverage, but there was a lot of misinterpretation of the circumstances around that. I'm going to actually read out this supporter question from Paul Kalamata, and before I sort of speak more about it. Do you think it would be worthwhile / feasible for outlets and individuals such as yourselves who review games to all be part of a collective trade guild that enforces certain standards when it comes to how games are reviewed and how access to them is provided? I raise this question in light of the recent news that Eurogamer, along with some other prominent reviewers, were not given Starfield review codes early enough to have their scores ready by the embargo date. I also think back to when CDPR manipulated the review process for Cyberpunk 2077 by only providing early code to reviewers on PC, possibly to avoid having all the severe issues on consoles aired before launch. Seems plausible to me that in both instances there may well be a cynical calculation being made that if the meta review scores could be inflated during the initial launch window when most sales occurred, then it's worth cherry-picking the outlets that would reliably provide you the scores you are looking for. Since there's nobody pushing back or regulating against this in a preventative fashion, wouldn't there always be the temptation for publishers to game the system? And the answer is absolutely yes. There was a thing in the Eurogamer blog which didn't really ring true with me, which was basically that Eurogamer and Digital Foundry always get access to the same code. There's been numerous examples in the past where developers or publishers don't actually want us to see the game until launch. There can be possibly nefarious reasons for that, but there can also be reasons such as, would be much more comfortable for you actually to be reviewing the day one experience as users will be experiencing it. So the thing about this thing in this sort of concept of having standards that are enforced across the industry is that it's just not really likely to happen realistically. And there can be some reasons why a publisher may not want to give code to a specific outlet. There may be previous history. There may be all manner of different reasons why that might happen. There can be legitimate reasons or understandable reasons why they don't want to distribute code. And I think fundamentally there's no obligation or entitlement for a outlet to expect to be given code, right? I think in the case of this one, what was frustrating was that Bethesda in the UK would not tell us exactly when the code would arrive, or tell Eurogamer when the code would arrive, just later this month. And that turned out to be basically, right up against the embargo date. And for many outlets, they actually received it 1 minute after the embargo. So I don't really think there's much you can do about this except to understand that underpinning this whole idea that Paul is putting here is the concept that most reviewers may be biased and not doing their jobs properly. There's this continuing bizarre obsession on social media that reviewers are being paid
Yeah, what
for
the
their
hell?
reviews. There is no payment going on whatsoever, as far as I'm aware, at least. And I think that's actually reflected in the diversity of scores that we actually got on the Starfield review period, where, you know, it was basically, we saw for like 3.5 out of 5s, we saw 7 out of 10s, we saw 8s, we saw 9s, we saw 10s. This is kind of like a typical delta for any given high quality game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really see this sort of concept of, you know, this sort of nefarious schemes going on. What I will say, though, which is just utterly bizarre, is that seemingly in the US, virtually everyone got the code, whether they were even reviewers or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's kind of completely at odds with what happened in Europe and the UK, which I can only assume is operating on a different policy. To talk about some of the misconceptions that have occurred based on the Eurogamer blog, which I feel compelled to address. Number one, there's this idea that Eurogamer was given the code on the proviso that only Digital Foundry would get it. That didn't happen. No. We were given the code independently of Eurogamer because we're separate entities that
Yes.
just happen to publish text on the same platform.
And by the way, we should also note that we sometimes work with different PR agencies entirely versus Eurogamer. We're not always getting the code from the same place. Like Bethesda
Yeah.
US, for instance, that's also where we got access to Quake 2 from, the recent Quake 2 remastered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we didn't get anything from Bethesda UK for Quake 2 at
Right.
all.
So like
yeah.
Eurogamer operates with whatever context they have, and we often have different contacts. That's the big difference.
The second misconception that came out is that we accepted the code on proviso that Eurogamer would not have it. Right, that is another one of the misinterpretations from that Eurogamer post, which I do think could have been worded better in retrospect. What actually happened there is that we got the game, they didn't. We were aware that they didn't have the game. And I actually wrote to Bethesda US and said, this is a bit awkward because there's a chance that maybe Tom Morgan would be, you know, playing the game in the office. They won't have it. It's going to be a very bizarre situation. What's going on there? And then basically they refer to Bethesda UK and the game still wasn't forthcoming. The concept that we can actually just give them the game because we're part of Eurogamer, it's not my game to give.
That's right.
Right? Bethesda US didn't say, oh, here's the code, distribute it at will. That's not the way things work. What else? I mean, there's just all manner of sort of unpleasant things that have arisen based on that post, which I just got to set the record clear here, right? I mean, there are scenarios where, as I said, there can be entirely understandable reasons from a publisher not to give us the game, but to give it to Eurogamer. Maybe they don't want us to see a day one patch situation. And that was actually what happened, as I said, with Hogwarts Legacy. They said, we'll give you the game, but it's going to be on day one because we want you to see the day one experience. That kind of draws an end to the whole discussion at that point. It's like, fair enough. What else are we supposed to do? We can't force them to give us the game. And it's not really my style to actually go public and say, hey, they're not giving us the game. That's,
Yeah.
That was actually a really disappointing sort of situation to be thrust into, but there it is.
Really annoying. Yep.
I think that's all we've really got to say about that. But what do you guys take on? What's your take on the whole reviewing thing? I do think there is obviously this weird policy difference between the European side of Bethesda and the US side, which hasn't been explained, and. There can be any number of reasons why that is the case, but ultimately that is the situation. There wasn't seemingly any kind of limitation on the US side. Everybody got it that I'm aware of. There's no sort of schemes to stop people getting access, but in the UK it was certainly very, very strange indeed, and I hope lessons can be learned from that. Any final observations from you guys on that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's the differences between different PR agencies, I think, is really important to understand. Is like that's how code is given, right? Like you have your PR team in each region, they are allowed to distribute code to reviewers, and that's what they do. And it does absolutely vary per region. And given our more global positioning and the fact that not all of us are in the UK anyway, we do sometimes deal with other PR agencies, right? So, and I think that's true for any site. And it's just clearly that in this case, the UK, Bethesda, they had a different policy versus the US on this for whatever reason.
Yeah, it wasn't just Eurogamer or indeed the entirety of
No.
the Read Pop sites that were basically locked out of the
Edge
game.
Magazine didn't get it. The very excellent
The
reviewer
Guardian.
Skill Up did not get it. And a bunch of others as well that you would expect to have received it. They didn't get it either. So I don't like the fact that that article was spinned to implicate that, oh, Bethesda didn't want to send it to just our sites because it wasn't just Eurogamer, right?
Yeah.
It was not.
Yeah, I think that was pointed out, to be fair. But
yeah, but the
even so,
tone and you know.
yeah, it was a bit sort of light on detail, and it also seemed to sort of not mention that, hey, I actually spoke to Bethesda US to explain the awkwardness of this particular situation, but it didn't really shift the needle. What can I do about that? That's not great. But yeah, that was a bit of an unpleasant side of the situation, and obviously it's made our lives slightly more challenging the last few days. But ultimately, you're going to get the same coverage that we were doing anyway, and it's ultimately looking like a really good game. And I was actually really excited to get Oliver's video out on embargo. It was unclear whether we'd be able to do that because fundamentally we're a small team and 3 of us were at Gamescom.
Yeah,
Oliver came through.
Yeah, thank God, because I didn't even really get to start my video until Tuesday. I just been playing up to that point, and putting these videos together, it's time consuming. But Oliver started playing on the weekend, and he got it done. So we got that important info out there. So thank goodness for Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was actually a really positive story, right? I can understand, as I said, there have been situations in the past where people would prefer not to give us code, but the story we had to tell was actually, well, we've put this game through the ringer, and it's pretty good, actually.
Came out pretty well. Yeah, absolutely.
Series S was actually a surprise to
Positive
me.
story,
That was one thing. That was actually one thing where they did ask us to test Series S once the day one patch had arrived, because I think there were some issues that they were looking to resolve.
There was specifically a bug related to texture loading on a save that was deep into the game, is what we were told. Where it's like, if you've been playing for say X amount of hours, there was some sort of possibly like a memory leak or some kind of bug there that would cause the texture assets not to load in properly on Series S, but that was corrected in the day one patch, and I mean, none of us have been able to replicate that.
Yeah,
no. It actually looks like a really, really solid port, which is kind of what Series S needs at the moment. And I mean, I wouldn't be adverse to playing the game on Series S at all. It just looks like a slightly pared back version of the Series X version. It looks like a really good port. But yeah, that was great to see that actually validated in Oliver's video, and to be there on embargo with that validation. I was quite happy to see that. When I actually saw the video the day before, John and I took a look at it, and it was like, yeah, this is actually something we're really excited to put live at launch, and there it is. I think that's all we've got to say about Starfield at the moment. I think we do want to do a Starfield Direct where we answer a lot of supporter questions about that. And I've also, I don't know if you can see it in the background there, that is the Xbox Series X CPU on a PC motherboard.
Ooh. With
a GPU that has much in common with the PlayStation 5 GPU. And I have indeed played the PC version of Starfield on it.
Huh.
And maybe actually Oliver could put in a quick teaser clip. As I speak, but yeah, look forward to that. But let's move on to our next news topic. Okay, so our second news topic after that mammoth one was basically a bit of afters from Gamescom last week. Now, obviously, Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be launching on PlayStation 5 a few days after this particular Direct goes live. It's going to be launching only on PlayStation 5 because of developmental difficulties with the Xbox version, specifically the implementation of split screen on Xbox Series S. During Gamescom, there's a really good interview on Eurogamer with Phil Spencer where he's essentially doubling down on Series X and its importance. But at the same time, it does look as though they have made compromises to allow Baldur's Gate to appear on Xbox Series consoles, specifically by temporarily, I hope, removing split screen from the Series S version of the game, which basically is an adjustment to the technical requirements that Microsoft has. But John, I'd say it's a positive one.
Yeah, I would say so too. It's actually, this is a limitation we were concerned about for a while regarding the Series S, is that could it potentially hold back games on Series X in specific instances or with specific features? Would it affect the release of them, which was previously the case with this game? But they made the choice to go ahead and cut that split screen feature, possibly add it later if they can get it working on Series S to ensure that the game still ships on Xbox. And I think for this project, it's absolutely the right call. And I hope that this is kind of like opening the floodgates, so to speak, for future situations like this. I know it's a little bit tricky, but it actually reminds me of the old Xbox Live Arcade limitation, where early on games were only allowed to be like, say, it was very small, like 100 megs, or I don't remember the exact number, but it was very small. And then Castlevania Symphony of the Night comes along, and it doesn't fit within that limit. And Konami basically requested to have that limit removed, and Microsoft obliged. And ever since then, they allowed larger games on Xbox 360's digital marketplace. So I kind of view this as a similar thing where during the early part of the generation, they have this strict limitation in place, but now it's like, okay, maybe we can relax this a little bit. I mean, obviously they still want to ensure that Series S owners get a good experience, right? You don't want to allow a situation where a game turns out great on Series X and terrible on Series S, right? Nobody wants that. But I think with specific features and things like this, where the Series S maybe just isn't quite there, it makes a lot of sense, right? So this is likely a reactionary thing, given the fact that this basically reviewed as like the most popular or the highest rated PC game ever on Metacritic, or at least RPG on Metacritic, right? So like its reception, it being such a great game, likely pushed their hand a little bit, where they're like, okay, we need to get this on Xbox. And they're right. But
yeah.
Well, early access opens as we speak tomorrow. I'm kind of very curious to see what this split screen mode looks like on PlayStation 5, because the game's heavy, right?
Yeah.
You know, we didn't really look at split screen on PC, right?
No.
But I can't imagine that the CPU requirement, which is already onerous in that third act, is actually going to get lighter by having split screen. And so the concept of how that's going to play out on the PlayStation 5, well, we've got our save games ready, right, Alex?
Yeah, let's just hope they transfer over just fine. I know Oliver, when we were trying to do it, when he was looking at it, covering the game on Steam Deck, we were having issues there with him using my saves. So I'm just hoping that that Larian launcher, which is definitely not annoying, works really well for this instance where we want to see what the heck's going to happen on PlayStation 5. They just released patch number 2, which apparently does offer a number of CPU-related optimizations that will help the third act out. This happened last evening. I have yet to even touch it. I don't even know what that does. Interestingly, a lot of them were based around optimizations for controller input and CPU stuff, which is a very weird. To say the least, when I was doing the benchmarking of that Baldur's Gate 3 third act, you can't really benchmark the game by moving with the mouse because you're like constantly clicking, and it's different every time. The way the characters do their startup and stop animation, it's just not going to offer actually a smooth scrolling experience to do that benchmark in a reasonable way. So I did it with a controller, which the game obviously supports. And it would be pretty funny if they were doing some really bad stuff with the controller polling, which was breaking the game. Obviously, I don't know about that. But if they manage, I think pre-release, it was targeting 60 FPS on PlayStation 5. I think we heard that from a couple people.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
That's I remember that was the impressions that were given. at least I think from people that we talked to at EG.
Okay.
And that would be intense if they managed that. I would like to know how, but currently I'm in the doubt category. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, interesting stuff. Obviously, we're going to be taking a look at that one as quickly as we can, but do bear with us because the schedule's a nightmare at the moment. But we'll get onto it as quickly as we can. But let's move on to the next news topic. Okay, so I guess it's PSA time. Last week we discussed our impressions of AMD's FSR3 frame generation technology at Gamescom. We saw a couple of demos there. It was looking quite promising, albeit with certain, dare I say it, caveats.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically it's now become sort of common knowledge that FSR3 is going to be sort of open source, which means it will work on anything, which means it works on the consoles. And man, this has caused a tsunami of questions and misconceptions, and I believe it's called hopium. Let's go through some. I mean, we got a big bunch of questions. I'm just going to rattle through them, and then we can talk about it. This one from Darjarko. Another happy half fortnight, gents. With the prospect of PS5 Pro seemingly inevitable now, and the recent revelations surrounding FSR 3.0 on consoles, doesn't it seem likely that Sony will be working closely with AMD to essentially build the spec around FSR on console? Could we perhaps call the PS5 Pro the PS5 FSR edition? What evidence can you see of this in the specs that have leaked? Also, do you think it will use the same detachable drive solution as the PS5? Not slim, well, who knows on that one. Aomin 1984. Will devs be able to achieve 60 FPS more often on consoles with FSR 3? This one from Garfield. Do you think studios will go back and update their cross-gen lineup, which are already at 60 FPS, with FSR 3 to enable a potential 4K 120 target? There are so many last-gen games, racing ones especially, that would definitely benefit from it, I suppose. This one from Kellen Sandifer. Wow. Hey DFT, Richard, in brackets God.
Zod.
Not God, Zod. Yeah. Alex got there before me. John, in brackets Jedi Knights, Performant Console King. Alex, Sith Lord of the PC Master Race.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Yeah, we've got issues with the whole Master Race thing. Anyway, if I recall, the series consoles have machine learning capabilities. Will this help with new technologies like FSR3? So basically, I think people have sort of taken the ball and run with it in all sorts of different directions. And the topic heading that I've put on the docket is in block capitals. Stop getting console FSR3 wrong.
Yeah, really.
Alex?
Gosh.
Yeah, we don't want Alex to lose his hair from pulling it out in frustration.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things. All those questions, they are spoken in earnest, I'm presuming. And the whole thing is, I just want to reference to see why there needs to be a reality check about FSR3 and consoles, is that AMD put actually out a recommended specs for AMD's FSR3. And the supported line is RX 5700 and above, but the recommended is RX 6000 series and above. That should tell you actually quite a bit, because in terms of like performance differential, like 5700 XT is kind of what I'd put that PlayStation 5 performance level in, and RX 6000 series is better than something like a PlayStation 5 or usually Xbox Series X, like when you get into that 6800 class. AMD is already trying to manage expectations about FSR3 in terms of where it becomes the quality input latency, which they haven't even talked about at all yet, which is a whole nother thing I'll just talk about soon. They have certain quality expectations of it, so they want expectations managed before it comes out. Don't expect it to be great for all hardware in all situations. So they're already doing that, and we already say, consoles probably don't fit into that performance bracket necessarily anyways, which is their recommended spec for FSR3. Secondly, during our conversation with them, Nick Tibiros did mention that it has a variable performance cost, which was semi-high already on a 7900 XTX. If you scale that down to a GPU that is probably less than half as powerful, like you see in the PlayStation 5, well, then you start running into issues of actually having it be viable to be done in real time without dramatically making performance worse. There's that, and there's also the fact that they have really yet to talk about how they're going to manage FSR 3's input latency. They've talked about anti-lag plus, I think, to other outlets. And this seems to be a driver solution from AMD, which might be limited to their current set of cards, as in the 7000 series cards, and is a per game basis, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It being limited to the current set of cards, that's quite a lot there. So, and there's a lot of mitigating factors there that say actually we shouldn't expect too much for FSR 3 on consoles in general already. But one of the big things that there's a couple of these questions that have come out, and all the comments that I see under the videos and also on Twitter and elsewhere, is that people think you can use FSR 3, let alone DLSS 3, to get a game up that was targeting 30 FPS to 60 FPS. And boy, oh boy, for most games out there, you would definitely not want to play that game at that FSR 3 experience. AMD themselves say the baseline performance experience that they want is like a game that already runs comfortably at 60 FPS.
Yep.
Then you could take it higher with FSR 3. And that isn't the case for all games, especially ones that are targeting next generation features, UE5, whatever your Jedi Survivors are, etc. So I would say there's so many different factors that say FSR 3 is actually right now a very PC focused feature, because it's a response to DLSS 3, that if we get FSR 3 on the PS5 or Xbox Series X, then it will be a pretty rare situation indeed, based upon everything we know so far.
They were talking, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, because my memory isn't so good on this one, but they were talking about the 7900 XTX dealing with 4K FSR 3.
Right.
I think they were talking about something like, what was it, 1.9 to 4 milliseconds, depending on how occupied the async compute pipelines are.
I think it was 1.4 to 1.7 milliseconds. And so that's a lot. That's depending upon the async occupancy of what they were seeing. That means that technically it might actually, since we didn't get actually a firm number there of how much it actually costs without asynchronous occupancy, because that's another interesting thing about this. Like on that big GPU, there was enough of a gap while something was occurring that asynchronous compute could run and shave off a good amount of the time there. But what if asynchronous compute is already tapped out, which in a console game, you actually might expect it to be, because they have a much more fine-grained understanding of what GPU they're up against and how they can schedule things. And also like the amount of time it takes to do a shadow pass or something like that. They may actually already have that tapped out on consoles. So the cost could be potentially even higher and worse than I've mentioned just up until this point. So there's a lot of things, like Rich has just said, like that get in the way of this actually being very viable, I would say, currently, based upon everything we know, for PS5 and Xbox Series X. PS5 Pro, though, is such a big question mark that I really couldn't say too much about it, actually.
I'd be extremely surprised if they built a console around FSR. And when they're talking about, I mean, the leak mentioned an 8K performance mode, and 8K tops out at 60 hertz, so it's no use there.
Yeah, it's
because 30 to 60 on an 8K image would be, monstrous even for the XTX, I'd imagine.
Yeah, really.
So, yeah, just to quickly answer some of these questions, will devs be able to achieve 60 FPS more often on consoles with FSR 3? No, for the reasons stated, because it's got its own computational cost that could be quite significant on a console. Do you think studios will go back and update their cross-gen lineup, which were at 60 with FSR 3, to enable a potential 4K 120 target? The other thing to bear in mind is that FSR 3 leans heavily into FSR 2, needs it for the motion vector data, so that cross-gen lineup would actually kind of need to have FSR2 in it as well. So that's not an insignificant integration to add in from scratch. So I don't think so. The machine learning capabilities of the series consoles, it doesn't use machine learning, as to the best of my ability.
No.
So it's not going to help. So yeah, I mean, you get an idea of the kind of sort of elevated expectations that there have been for FSR 3 on the consoles. It will run on it, to be clear, because it's, fundamentally it's a It's a compute thing,
Yeah.
right? It will run on any GPU. The question is how effective it would be. And 4K might be out of reach. Possibly lower resolutions could be more viable. The other thing, of course, is the whole lag situation, how you mitigate latency. If you play, even if you could get 30 up to 60, we've seen what DLSS 3 with VSync was like.
Yeah. That's another thing.
With
VSync,
latency,
right?
And it was
Like,
it was really bad.
So like DLSS 3, once again, we don't have FSR 3 on our hands. We still have, there's so many questions about how it's going to latency mitigate exactly, but we know for DLSS 3, it's integrating reflex. And if you're playing with reflex on like a 4K 120 hertz panel, you're not actually playing the game at 120 FPS. You're playing at like 116, 117 FPS.
Mm-hmm.
It's utilizing VRR to latency mitigate. So if FSR 3 follows a similar path, that would mean to actually have the experience that you want people to play with, it would require a VRR screen.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know how many devs would do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of these kind of interesting conjectures, which the practical application of which is going to be extremely challenging. And guess we'll just have to wait and see on that one. Let's move on to the next news topic. So this one's really disappointing and actually upsetting. A studio with 30 years of history has just been closed down immediately. All games cancelled. Volition, responsible most recently for the Saints Row series, but they've got a rich and varied history, amazing games across decades of development. It's just kind of gone. The announcement was made yesterday, and it seems to be fallout from a situation that occurred with the parent company Embracer Group, where it looks like a potential investment from Saudi Arabia didn't pan out for them. So there's been a lot of quote unquote restructuring, which has basically resulted in this happening. It is, to use the DF vernacular, not great, is it, John?
You're absolutely right, Rich. It is a huge bummer, given that Volition, they've been around a long time. They split off from Parallax Software, responsible for Descent. Their first games were Descent Free Space and Free Space 2, which, to my money, Free Space 2 is still one of the best space combat games ever made. It's still great today. Obviously, they went on and they shifted around a lot. They focused on things like Red Faction, Summoner, and the like. But then I feel like Saints Row, they really got their footing with the mass market, and they did really well with Saints Row 3, or the third especially. And Saints Row 4 was also great. But at the same time, as much as I love their prior works, it is pretty clear that they struggled a bit after Saints Row 4. So 10 years ago is when that first released. Since then, they basically released Agents of Mayhem and this Saints Row reboot. Agents of Mayhem was largely panned and not a great game, I would say. The Saints Row reboot, it's not bad, but I don't think it actually really managed to get the series back on track, and it didn't land with the amount of it people didn't love it. And I think it was not financially a huge hit for them. So given that, their last 10 years, I can kind of understand why they would be on the chopping block, but I wish there was some other solution to this rather than just saying, nope, we're closing the studio, right? Surely there has to be some interested party out there that could take over the financial burden, so to speak, in acquisition, for instance. This is a place where even some, they have their hands full already, but, Microsoft doing all their acquisition stuff, maybe they could have picked them up. Some other company could have picked them up, even a Tencent or something, but something to keep them going, because I think that there was still a lot of talented people there that could have done a lot, but I don't know. It's business, and business is often cruel.
Yeah, Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, I think in this case, John's right. There is obviously an entire infrastructure there of how to make a game at that studio and make it fine enough. Based upon the last one, maybe it didn't sell or do as well as everything, but that entire infrastructure and all those people who work together and all their ideas and that team spirit that might exist just vanishes in one day. And that's a lot of potential that's just wasted, I almost feel, beyond the whole historical aspect of them having put out some games that we really like. Free Space 2. I love Red Faction 1, 2, and Guerrilla quite a lot, actually. So I'm sad about that. But I just think like there was maybe actually a different scenario here where it could have been done differently so that the team still exists in some form. I think another thing that it also means is that we'll just see nothing of their IPs for who knows how long now. Like, we haven't seen a Red Faction game since Armageddon. I guess we won't get a Saints Row game again. They were also, before closing, they did announce that they were looking at actually fixing Saints Row 2 on PC. Is that just gone? That sucks.
Forever broken.
Yeah,
forever broken in that case. So
the whole Embracer thing seemed to start off with this huge wave of optimism, and amazing things would be happening. But it's I'm kind of worried now that they just expanded too quickly. And if something doesn't pan out, for example, Saints Row, then it's instant oblivion. This is really not great at all, is it?
No.
And maybe there is the case that the concept of one studio being reliant on one IP, it could all go horribly wrong if the game doesn't hit, because the pressure to succeed now in this industry, when so much is being invested into a single development, is just frankly huge. And you're right, John, the quality wasn't there for the last few years. And that is unfortunate, right?
But yeah, like you say, it's just a side effect of where we're at with the industry, and I think it's extremely ruinous. And this probably won't be the last of these types of studios to just disappear, where it takes so much more time to make a game like this now, like just so many more years, so many more people, just so much more money. Like, it's such a huge commitment that if it doesn't hit, that's it. Like, most companies can't survive that, right? That's not how it used to be. Like, all the output from these studios has slowed down so much just to get to where we are today. So I'd much rather have shorter games with worse graphics. And no, I'm not kidding.
I always like that. The shorter games with worse graphics thing. I think it's more like I would like shorter games that, like, you can still have good graphics with a short game. Like,
that's the reality, right?
Yeah. Shorter games, just less content.
Less game.
I'm fine with less content. Yeah.
I've got to admit, I was always secretly hoping that Red Faction would return.
I know.
You're right.
It kind of hails from an era where boundaries were being pushed in terms of physics and stuff like that, which we don't really see anymore, which we're hoping to see with this generation when, we thought we were getting this massive CPU upgrade.
But so far.
But so far, what have we seen on that regard? It's a bit disappointing that, quite likely we'll never see a Red Faction game again. And I actually, would recommend going back and taking a look at Red Faction Guerrilla Remastered, which was
Rich, it's remastered.
Remastered.
Yeah.
I mean, that game spawned so many fun things, like the ostrich hammer and the space asshole video, if you've ever seen it.
What?
Oh my god, so funny.
Oh dear. I was just sort of reminded of a DF clip that went up yesterday where we were talking about things we love to hate in games, and one of them was games where the names force you to say it in a different way. The exclamation point on bug.
Bug!
Bug! And, remastered is definitely up there, right?
It's good.
Yeah, sad news though, and I hope something positive emerges from the wreckage, but I'm going to say it's not good. Wow. Let's move on to the next topic. Actually, I'm going to start this next topic with a supporter question. It's from Concrete Llama. Hey, John, did you get to play Sonic Superstars at Gamescom? What were your impressions? Well, I understand you did.
I did get a chance to play it.
Impressions are quite positive.
Yeah, that's right. I played it at the Xbox booth. Walked over there, gave it a shot. I was playing on the Xbox Series X, and it's extremely promising. I will say that much. So we've since learned, or before I played the demo, we had learned that they were actually using they adapted the physics system used in Sonic Mania to this game. And boy, can you tell, because this is the first time that a side-scrolling attempt at Sonic with 3D polygon graphics actually feels like Sonic. It controls extremely well. It's all the momentum is there. Just Sonic behaves as you'd expect, which feels great. It's hard to say much about the level design at this point. Like, I thought it was pretty promising in the demo. There's a few automatic style sections, but that's also case in some of the later 2D games, and I think it plays like a dream, and I'm super excited for it. There's a ton of potential here, and heck, it even seems to be 60 FPS on Switch, which is even more surprising somehow. So
that's great.
It looks like they've got a banger in the works, and thankfully this demo had more original music that seems to have been composed for it, rather than all the Sonic 4 tunes that were in the Summer Games Fest build that we saw video of. Because the Sonic 4 music sucks. It's terrible. And I was actually worried that they were using that as a basis for the music. But thankfully that is not the case.
Okay, good.
Okay. Any further impressions? I mean, it's coming soon.
It's coming in October.
I mean,
it's hard to say more than that. It's a demo, right? But I am now extremely excited for it. Before I was cautiously excited for it. But I feel a lot more confident in it now, I would say.
Wow.
Wasn't there a story this week that emerged that Sega were sort of not particularly wedded to the concept of doing more pixel art games?
Yeah, I think it was Iizuka or someone made a comment about how he doesn't think pixel art will remain in the future, which I think is preposterous. Because pixel art is it's like saying, we decided that for art going forward, you can no longer paint with this type of brush. It's just gone. Yeah. No more.
Yeah.
Like, that's basically what you're saying, right? Pixel art doesn't always need to be a throwback to retro either. It is what the artist makes of it. And it's an awesome way to do art. And it can be done in any sort of resolution, there's so many different reasons for doing it. And as long as it remains beautiful as an art form, there's no reason why it would go away. Especially when you consider, like, a lot of pixel art games are still selling well, and it's not just nostalgia either, right? I mean, the entire Minecraft aesthetic, even though it's 3D, is based on pixel art. But then you have something like Terraria, which is actually pixel art. The game sold like 45 million copies. I mean, there's this that doesn't limit its potential for success. It almost feels to me like, and I don't know how true this is, but there's this feeling like that Sonic Team looks a little bit at the success of Sonic Mania with this kind of like side eye, if you will. Like, maybe not, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's weird, the reaction to it, because it's basically the best Sonic game ever made, and Sonic Team itself didn't really make it, right?
Do you think it's a bit of wanting to synergize with the Sonic movies, which are 3D?
I suspect there is an element of that for sure, where it's like, well, we got Sonic looking rendered. This is what it's all about. He's a 3D render now, right?
Yeah.
So I do have a feeling that Sonic probably won't be going back to pixel art anytime soon, which is a bummer.
So no Sonic Mania 2? Is that what you're saying?
I doubt it's going to happen. I have zero faith.
In spite of the success, that's nuts.
I know they sold a ton of copies, but I mean, the team that made it is making their own game, which I will cover, and that looks awesome. But
it's baffling though, isn't it?
Confusing.
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next news topic. So, final one for this week. Let's talk about Armored Core 6. Tom is currently working on the console head-to-head, so he's going to be looking at the Xbox Series X, the S, the PlayStation 5, and also, because it seems to increase performance, running the PlayStation 4 Pro app on the PlayStation 5. So there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff there. I look forward to that. But John, you've been playing the game on PC because we got a PC key as well. It's not currently in Tom's coverage plans, but you kind of got to talk about this.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight this for a couple of reasons. I mean, first, the game itself is phenomenal. I was honestly gobsmacked by it. I love Armored Core games. I've been playing them since the PS1 era, but I was surprised at how well they managed to, like, the control is so good in this game. It feels amazing to play it. And the level design, the map layouts, like the sense of scale and depth to the world is unbelievable looking. Like, it's just, wow, really amazing. But it's the technical side of the PC version specifically, which really took me by surprise, because it's no secret From Software's PC versions haven't been very good, right? You don't get ultra wide support. They're usually capped at 60 frames per second or 30 as it was with the original Dark Souls. And there's just lots of other weird issues that make it feel very much like this is just a console game poorly adapted to the PC. Not so with Armored Core 6. So right away you can run at high frame rates. So I'm playing at 120 frames per second. Feels amazing. It has full beautiful HDR support on the PC. The introduction, which is a video, is extremely high res, like full 4K, and properly paced. It's probably the best FMV playback I've seen in a PC game like ever, which small thing, but it's something to note. That's really cool. The loading times are really quick. The options menu it's not amazing, but it has enough features in there and enough tweakables that allow you to push it beyond the console spec. The only real disappointment there is that the ray tracing feature only applies to the garage, which I'm a little surprised they didn't allow you to use that in the game on PC as well. But, even still, the game looks great. There's also there's no stutter, there's no hiccups. It's just full flat out 120 frames per second, perfectly fluid gameplay. Not a single issue anywhere in there. It is flawless on my PC, at least. I can't speak for lower end systems. I don't know what it's like, but this is the best PC experience I've had all year in terms of just a game working. I literally started the game the first time, went to the main menu, turned everything to max because why not? Hit new game, and that's it. It just worked. It's perfect. And that's become so rare in PC games these days, right? Like you just don't really see this very often. And yeah, it's maybe not cutting edge visuals, though I think visually speaking, it's absolutely beautiful, given that, it's just their art direction is so good. But they also introduced SSR, which I thought was interesting, which I don't believe they've had in the past, though using it on, puddles and such in water isn't always the best move. It can be a little distracting, but it's better than just a bunch of low res cube maps. I'll say that much. And I guess the biggest thing really is the biggest surprise is the controls, right? Because I'm playing it with mouse and keyboard, and that is not the way you want it to play from Software's prior games. But in this case, the mouse and keyboard control is so precise and responsive and good. I think the game plays better that way. It really allows you to pinpoint your targets and just absolutely, nail it. And you need to do it because this game is hard, like From's other recent games. And that actually turned out to be like the super secret sauce that makes this amazing, because it's a mech game where you're building your mech out, or your AC as it's called, with lots of parts, and you need to spec your AC for different missions based on the requirements of that mission. And because it's challenging enough, you can't just spam your way through it or not engage with the systems. The game basically demands that you engage with its systems, which itself is very rewarding, and it teaches you how to use these different systems, and you have to learn them. And I found that so remarkably satisfying. Like even the first boss took me just a few tries, which took me by surprise. It happens in the first 15 minutes of the game. Once you get it, you got it, but you really need to use all your options available and understand how the game plays. And once you get that, it's mind-meltingly good. Like even at this point, after playing for some hours, I expect that this game is going to be high up on my Game of the Year list if it continues at this quality, because holy crap.
Wow.
Armored Core 6, ladies and gentlemen, it's great, and I'm surprised it's not getting even more attention. I mean, I know it doesn't have the fantasy themes that people love from the Souls games, but it really is this beautiful fusion of the Souls franchise with Armored Core. You really feel it in the mission design, just that first moment where you're you start in this weird floating garage thing. It's this huge hangar. But then you walk out on this edge of this platform and you look out and there's a gigantic mountain range, and they're that city far in the distance, that's where your target is. And then you actually jet out towards it, and you're flying through the sky. There's a huge floating mechanical fortress hanging above you in the sky. And there's all these mountains everywhere and a city on the ground. And just the whole design of the scene was breathtaking. And it's just wow. And it's so much destructible stuff too, because you're a giant mech, right? That happens.
Well, obviously we'd need to see how the game plays out on lower end hardware, because you're looking at a 1200K and 4090. But this is, potentially where a situation where we're actually seeing a return for owning a powerful PC, whereas, we've played so many PC games this year where, well, maybe we should just stick to the console version because it's overall more solid or consistent.
Elden Ring was like that.
Yeah.
It was a mess.
Absolutely. And that's the situation seemingly with Armored Core on consoles, where it has a similar performance profile to Elden Ring. So this is an example where you can power past it at launch without needing to wait for patches, seemingly.
I really wish I knew what was going on with From sometimes, like that 59, 58 FPS Nomad's Land that they really love on consoles at times. It's so weird.
I'll tell you what, maybe, Occam's razor possibly here, which is that they saw that they sold a huge amount of Elden Ring on PC and decided they needed possibly to take the platform a bit more seriously.
Yeah.
Give it a bit more thought. It looked as though it had a lot of low-hanging fruit scenarios for improving performance based on, what we saw at launch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you think that maybe that's the case, but I'm glad you had a great time with that, John.
Yeah, and I'm glad that From finally got a PC version that's great to play out the door.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's the end of our news stories this week. Let's move on to supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week we ask our supporters to barrage us with a big bunch of questions. I think this week we had something like 65. We're also going to be doing a Starfield Direct, which has its own bunch of questions as well. But let's move straight on to this first question. Actually, there's two questions here. I'm going to lump them together because it's all about Switch 2. The first one from Perfect_Organism. Go on, lads. Go on, lads. Did you see the Switch 2 at Gamescom? Go on, lads. The second question from Mr. Vice, I should say. Hey there, DF team. Rumours are that the new Switch will get an 8-inch 1080p LCD. Suppose the new hardware is also backwards compatible. Will the Switch in handheld mode use the same graphical settings as docked mode on the old Switch? Because docked mode on Switch already ran at 1080p. Or will they go the Microsoft route with Series S using the One S feature set? So new Switch handheld mode uses old Switch handheld mode settings. And the same for docked mode, of course. What are your thoughts on this? Excuse me for my bad grammar and keep up the valuable work you are doing. And also good luck with the month of October! It's going to be packed! ! And he's right there. Holy crap. First of all, did we see the Switch 2 at Gamescom? No.
Nope.
No NDAs here because we haven't signed anything because we didn't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit depressing. But, it was interesting to be in the business area. There's this massive sort of Nintendo walled-off area, and you couldn't help but wonder what was going on.
There was even a security guy at the back entrance of it watching the people who were bringing in food into it, like food. So, like, they did not want anyone getting in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can categorically, this isn't like an Xbox Series S situation where we saw it 6 months ahead of launch and couldn't tell anyone. We did not see the Switch 2 at Gamescom. Plenty of rumours circulating, of course, and what we did hear sounded interesting, but we're not going to talk about that until we've actually verified something. What do we think about this concept of what Mr. Vice here seems to be suggesting would be almost like an enhanced back compat where the dock mode would work on handheld? Alex, thoughts?
I mean, that'd be brilliant, actually. I don't know if that changes anything with regards to does dock mode in any game require you to have like a certain controller at all for any game? I'm just thinking about like controls being different if you're in docked versus you're in handheld mode. You know, John, of any game like that?
Did it say what now?
Where the docked, where you're the okay, so docked experience is usually just like resolution, but is there any game where they presume your control is different versus docked versus handheld mode?
Generally no, but there are a few games where you can use the touchscreen in portable mode that you cannot use in docked mode.
Yeah, Mario Maker, right?
Yeah, that's one of them, and there's some others as well. It's pretty uncommon, but that could potentially be an issue.
That's the one thing I was thinking. Otherwise, I don't see why this couldn't be a thing. But like, if there is some sort of situation where they presume like you can't use gyro, I have no idea. Then it would be not actually the best thing for every game. So there could be a whitelist in that case, which would make the most sense, or a blacklist. I guess.
It's an interesting conceit, right? The idea of the dock mode becoming the handheld mode on the next gen system. I suspect there's probably going to be some compatibility foibles that we just can't anticipate that would stop that happening. And maybe there would even be like maybe a clock speed match that would be required. What I'd really like to see would just be enhanced performance, right? That was, fundamentally there isn't always, especially on a handheld screen, a noticeable difference between what you'd get in docked versus what you get in handheld mode, and I'd much rather just have enhanced performance so the frame rate drops have gone.
Oh yeah,
possibly some 60 FPS patches, that sort of thing. So yeah, although maybe to paraphrase perfect underscore organism here, we should just go to Nintendo. Go on, lads.
Go on,
lads. Make an enhanced handheld mode for Switch 2. Go on, lads.
An email without a header. Just go on, lads.
We can make it slightly intimidating by doing "Go on, lads" in block capitals.
Yeah.
Go on, lads.
Is this a threat?
Okay, I think we've pretty much answered that one
Yeah.
now. Let's move on to the next question. So this one's from Struggling Shader. With the Metal Gear collection, we are seeing a huge polemic around resolution. Is it 720p? Is it 1080p? Why is it not 4K? So I wanted to ask, do you think raising the resolution actually improves the experience for games designed around CRTs? For instance, I don't think N64 titles like Banjo and GoldenEye look better at 4K on Xbox versus 720p on Switch. Do you think it makes a difference for PS2 era titles? And what would the quote-unquote ideal display resolution for each generation in emulation-based ports, and what would be the quote-unquote display resolution for each generation in emulation-based ports from PS1 to N64 all the way to 360 and PS3, maybe even early PS4 and Xbox One? That's quite an interesting question, John, but before I ask you about it, I've got to say that the boost in resolution on Bluepoint's Metal Gear remasters from their original to native 720p on PS360, I actually think it really complemented the artwork and made it look fantastic. So I actually would like to see it at 1080p and 4K, but I don't know about you.
Yeah, and I think this is something that varies a lot per game, and I know exactly what he's saying. First, with the Metal Gear collection, though, the problem there isn't so much the resolution choice, it's how they scale it. Like, I actually think 720p with nearest neighbor scaling to 4K, or some kind of, filter designed to create the illusion of a 720p grid would look pretty okay. But if you just take 720p and you bilinear upscale it to 4K, it looks like garbage, right? And that's probably what it's going to be. So that sucks. But it is true that a lot of older games, when you display them in high res, it basically reveals all the faults. It's absolutely true. It's especially true during the PS1 N64 era, and it's still very true during the PS2 era. I think they look their best on a CRT, designed how they're to be experienced. But failing that, then I actually think this is where it makes sense to invest more in like image presentation via either like shaders or some other sort of filter effects, and doing things like downsampling as well. Like downsampling from, say, like if you do 4K internal render, but then you output it at the original intended pixel resolution, it doesn't reveal the flaws so easily because it's still a lower apparent resolution, but you clean up all the aliasing and smooth out the lines, which can look really amazing. And I actually think that would be a good solution for the different types of consoles you're dealing with. So yeah, but again, it does vary from game to game. Some games scale up to high res perfectly fine. Others, it just breaks all the visuals and it ends up looking terrible. So you got to pick and choose. And unfortunately, I think most game developers re-releasing games don't seem to get this, and they usually get it wrong, and that's a bummer. I said bummer a lot this episode, which is also a bummer.
But it is. Yeah, I mean, I think there's just the basic case that with the Metal Gear collection, we're not getting the best possible product based on this early preview, right?
Yeah.
And, certainly the concept of the original Metal Gear Solid, we've seen that there are proven techniques for actually making PS1 games look better on modern systems. The DuckStation stuff that we've seen is pretty phenomenal, for example. Are we going to get anything like that? Has the effort gone in there? And the concept of a 30 FPS Metal Gear on Switch is kind of just ludicrous.
That's pathetic, I will say.
Yeah,
there's
particularly
zero
withering.
excuse for that. That's just bad work from them.
yeah.
Well, going back to Kellen Sandifer's sort of classification there, Alex is supposed to be the Sith Lord.
Yeah,
You're the Jedi Knight, but that was a very Sith.
That's true.
that was an absolute statement, John.
Yeah.
Yeah. Palpatine would have been proud of that. Pathetic.
Pathetic.
Yeah, so that's what we think of that. Obviously, the jury's going to be out until we actually see the game, but obviously there's a lot of confusion about it because, well, it looks 720p. They're saying it's 1080p. Why is it 1080p on a PS5?
Yeah, what's that
It's
about?
baffling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this question's from Alan. Hi, DF team! Exclamation point. I know you at DF do not really review games. Well, we do. But have you ever thought about some sort of scoring system for graphics, bugs, loading, etc., the more technical side of things? Maybe something like a bronze, silver, gold, and platinum scale. I know things cannot really have a number on it, but DF is pretty influential when it comes to newly released games.
Yeah.
I actually think this is quite an interesting idea, and it is something which we've kind of discussed before.
Yeah.
Something like a potential DF seal of quality. Alex, what do you think?
I like the seal of quality idea. Mainly, we're just saying we like this, and that's fine. And we're like, it's not a number, but it's saying that we approve of it in some way. And it could be graded in the sense of like, this is really great, or we could just say it's good. That's something simple. Numbers are a bit harder. As a joke, though, at some point in time, I would send Richard like a message and be like, this has like 100 stutters in 30 minutes or something like that. I'd send Rich a message and I'd be like, I counted the stutters in the first 30 minutes. There's 100. How many stutters per second are there? How many stutters per minute? And
that's amazing. Yeah, you actually send me a screenshot of your Premiere timeline where you've highlighted every single stutter.
And it's usually embarrassing when I do that. That's why I do it, because it is embarrassing. So I think, as a joke, I mean, at the end of this year, I'm going to hopefully have enough time to make a nice video about the games I like this year. But I do actually want to do the slightly jokey, the bad PC port video.
Yeah, the bad PC port video. Award them with the golden turd.
something because like this year was rough for that. It's slightly getting maybe a little bit better right now. We'll see. Starfield's looking promising. John's impressions there of a From Software game were very interesting. But I think I kind of want to do that this end of this year. So you may see the first incident of us giving away an award,
albeit a joke award.
A joke award, yeah.
Do you see any utility to an actual DF award there, John? In the way that Alan's describing?
We could totally bring in like the old GamePro system with that face of the dude looking increasingly bored and distraught as the quality goes down. But I've thought about this before. It would be interesting, but the only problem there is like when you actually the way people get when you hand out like specific like numbers and awards and stuff, they have very long memories in this stuff, and I feel like staying up, you can never stay consistent enough to please them, and it just creates like annoyances for us. And I don't know. I'm not sure I'd want to deal with the pain of handing out awards like that, given how people would probably react to it. Like, you only gave this one a silver, versus like something else. And it usually comes down to them not understanding what we're looking at per se. I hate to say it, but like it's like, they perceive things one way, but if we're talking about something else and like that perception doesn't match as theirs, and it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we do the best graphics of the year, so maybe we should make some awards to send out to the developers.
We could do that for the best
coffee cup. Digital Foundry coffee
pretty
cup.
Cool.
With a number 1 on it and a number 2.
Yeah, your large S is truly legendary there, Alex. Yeah. Nice coffee cup. Forget an award. Just
one coffee cup for the entire team. Share that.
Go on, lads. Make an award.
Yeah.
Go on, lads. Oh, dear. Yeah, we've got to put some thought into that. I actually had one of our competitors at Gamescom come up to me and mention that maybe we should be doing awards, but we have talked about it internally. Yeah, I do think that we're just never going to put numbers on anything, though. You know, we're not ever going to give, like, you know, an RTX 4090 10 out of 10 or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
a bit bizarre. I'd love to make an award that would just ruin Metacritic, though.
Oh yeah.
It's an award that cannot, you know, let's mark out of 1 million and you can't scale it down.
Or we
Yeah.
could just like add long decimals to our scores and only
Or make
score
it like
that way.
Make it like logarithmic or do something crazy.
Ooh, yeah.
You know, just like where they can't fit it in the system.
I'd just like a score that would completely skew all of the other scores, either upwards or downwards, according to our whim.
That would be good. We could also just do like scores in binary or something, you know,
Yeah.
or just have that would be entertaining, I think.
Yeah, well, the binary score would also cause havoc to Metacritic.
Oh my God,
'cause
yeah,
it would be either 0 or 10. wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Can't deal with that.
Oh boy.
Some interesting discussions there. Okay, let's move on to our final question of the show. This one's from the Knight who says "Nee!" exclamation point. Yeah. John, given that Nightdive Studios CEO mentioned on Twitter, The Darkness, it's on the list. Is this a game you're excited to see remastered? Additionally, what other games would you love to see included on this list? Now, I included this question because we had this discussion at Gamescom
Yeah.
immediately after meeting the Nightdive Studios
That's
boss.
true, to see Turok and Dark Forces. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have some notions here.
Yeah, I do think The Darkness would be worth doing because it is a really cool game, and it's only ever released on PS3 and 360.
Yes, like that's
There's
the
no
huge
PC
thing.
version.
It's like, what were they thinking back then? It's
I know.
Starbreeze. Like, what was that about?
Yeah, so that is one thing I would like to see. As for other games, I mean, the one I keep saying, I don't know if it'll ever happen, is Unreal 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Unreal, and I've been wanting that to return, but it just never seems to happen because Epic doesn't seem to remember it anymore. So if you say, what about Unreal? Like the engine? No, the game. The engine? You know, it's kind of the feeling you get.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned From Software's Kingsfield as a potential.
Oh, that's
which would
another
be
good
something
one. Yeah.
Very, very different that they haven't done before.
They've never done
which would be
anything like that
fascinating.
before, the Japanese style, but man, that would be cool. Like, yes,
Yeah.
Kingsfield.
But also, I mean, it's kind of funny that you do mention that, but there's games also that are Unreal that I always think about. I always think about Unreal Championship and 2, which
The
only
Xbox
exist on
games?
Xbox. They only exist on Xbox, but they're Unreal games and they're like generally really well received, and they're kind of just stuck on the original Xbox. Like those are classic, those are PC style games that are on Xbox, but they never left Xbox. I like seeing stuff like that, or even, you know, Unreal 2 exists in its weird old form.
It's not very
And
good though.
it's not a very
Unreal.
good game, but they took Turok 2 and they made it a better game.
That's true.
Nightdive could make Unreal 2 a better game, you know? So there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah, I'd love to see The Darkness. I think it definitely should come back. I remember when I first saw it on Xbox 360, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a game that didn't look like any other game on the system.
Yeah, it's a good looking one.
What they were doing there was just phenomenal. I just couldn't quite believe it. Unfortunately, I did play it on PlayStation 3 as well.
Oh, that was the
Yeah.
first time that generation I actually returned a game. I bought it for PS3 first, popped it in within like a few seconds. I was like, wait, there's no motion blur. The image quality sucks. I took it right back to Circuit City and just I just told him like, oh, I bought the wrong version. I actually have an Xbox. Can I get Xbox? And they kind of took pity on me and gave me Xbox. So I switched to the 360
Man.
version, which is much better.
I'm very...
It did have those longer movies on the TV.
Yeah, but you
screens,
know,
though,
whatever. I give me motion blur and better image quality any day.
Yeah.
and higher resolution and improved performance.
Yeah, and improved performance, all that kind of stuff.
I wonder why they switched from their custom tech though to Unreal at some point, and then to
Who
whatever
didn't?
they'd move for the payday. I like that. I always think about that. I'm like, why did that even happen? Their stuff looked great before then. It's
did.
amazing looking. Yeah.
Remember the water and the second Riddick game they did, like Assault on Dark Athena?
I think about it every night before I go to bed. Yeah.
It's freaking awesome.
I'm like that guy from the Wii channel. Like this water looks really good.
Nice water.
Nice water.
I wonder who owns the rights at this point, whether it is still Starbreeze or well, there'd also be the fact that it's a licensed property as well.
Right? Yeah.
It's not impossible though, considering that Enclave just got re-released in the last year or so.
Right? Yeah.
Which was another Starbreeze joint.
It was. Yeah.
I like Enclave.
It does it. Mm-hmm.
The obvious one, of course, is Quake 3 Arena with a Machine Games campaign.
Yeah, that's one that I would love to see. It's just like exactly like go to Quake 3, get the multiplayer out there again, but then build an actual single player campaign with the Quake 3 aesthetic and like build a universe around it. There's a ton of potential there to do something really cool and completely new. I would love to see that.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. I think I also mentioned the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games.
Oh, those are also another one. Oh my god!
Cool.
Moving into LucasArts territory, that would be pretty phenomenal. So once again, it's a go on lads.
Go on lads.
So this is becoming the go on lads edition of DF Direct Weekly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it. That's the final question, and therefore the end of the show. If you enjoyed it, please do the usual things: like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for notionally instant notifications. Gotta say, my notifications for Random Gaming in HD have dried up.
Same.
None this week.
I gotta say, I wasn't very pleased about a notification and or recommendation from YouTube. I'm gonna send it to Oliver, but I was recommended to watch the Imagine Dragons Starfield song music video, and
why was that particularly objectionable?
Let's just say I'm not a big fan of that musical group.
Yeah, so I saw somebody mention that on Twitter that they didn't like that, and then somebody responded in turn saying that, oh, you don't like that means you're woke because you don't like Imagine Dragons.
Let me just say,
what?
Imagine Dragons are like the Three Doors Down of the year 2010. I don't know if that means anything to anyone in the audience.
It means a lot.
Yeah.
I always thought of it as like Three Doors Down with Creed and all that.
Yeah.
That's why I was always thinking like there's got to be like the worst tour possible would be like Creedle Smack featuring Puddle of Mud, where it's like you got Creed, Godsmack,
oh my god,
Puddle of Mud all in one.
Oh my god, you're reminding me. There's a car that sometimes parks in the street around me, and it's like a old van that was spray painted like army colors, like a camo scheme, and there's a giant Godsmack logo on the side of it.
Yes.
I want to meet this person.
Yes.
Who are they?
Sorry, I'm just completely baffled by basically the last 3 minutes
of this conversation.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I actually come from a different element of the multiverse where Imagine Dragons just doesn't exist. I've never heard of them before.
Never heard.
Imagine that.
So, or not.
Or not.
But that's it. That is the end of the show. DF supporter program. If you want to support our work, join us. There's some amazing stuff going on there. Early access, bonus materials, big bunch of awesome stuff, especially in our community, which continues to be amazing. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching.